Hi everyone, my name is Josh Gallagher. I'm MediaCom's Chief Product Officer for Asia Pacific, and welcome to the Loop Live. And today that issue is around addressability and addressability in creative. And I'm going to welcome a couple of people to talk about that in a moment. But for me, this is a really interesting one because I think for the amount of conversation, for the amount of talk that addressability has within our industry, around personalization at scale, around the technology advancements that we've had around how creative agencies and creative products need to shift, only a really small amount of our media is addressable and has taken that next step. So I'm going to introduce a couple of people from our Australia team at MediaCom and a bit of a yin and yang of talent. We're going to have Tom Robertson, who's the head of creative systems, who looks specifically after our creative product, and also Rory Dolan, who is a unique character in terms of his ability around advanced analytics and being able to apply that in really practical settings in media. So welcome, Tom and Rory, and over to you.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks, Ben. I thought you were just going to finish on Rory as a unique character, and I would have agreed on that one. But thank you for everyone who's joining us today. Really appreciate your time. And it's a very interesting topic, this, and one that we're looking forward to talking to you about. And I guess to start with, kind of what we wanted to discuss today really is that next opportunity when it comes to addressability and addressable media, which is a topic that is very prominent, that we hear a lot about, both in trade press and in kind of our day-to-day lives as advertisers, and really where to next with it, and obviously kind of the role of both creative and media in that. So to start off, really, what we wanted to touch on was some of the opportunities that we see consistently that exist. But before I get into that, I think it's worth noting that at the moment, the prevailing themes in conversation when we talk about personalization is often one of fear and distrust. As we enter this kind of new era of advertising, we talk about cookieless worlds and environments where new software features are being rolled out, like Apple's ATT. This kind of perpetuates this narrative in mainstream press that personalized advertising or personalization in general is a negative and shouldn't be trusted. The reality we see is very, very different. And consistently, we see expectations of personalized experiences increasing, and research consistently demonstrating that it's not just viewed positively by audiences if we're able to offer a personalized experience, but actually it's very much expected. In some cases, as found by Adobe, so the third stat there, not considering how we personalize brand experiences, we can actually inhibit adoption or even sales through that. And most recently, only 2 weeks ago, the university, and I will need to update these slides, but the University of Antwerp actually released their latest research into the positive or the effects of personalization. And what they found was that in line with prior research, ads perceived as more personalized were seen as more relevant, which in turn linked to more positive brand attitudes and a greater propensity as well to kind of click through on advertising. And they predominantly focused on social, and they're looking to kind of broaden the scale of that study currently. So we know there is the opportunity or the opportunities present for brands to take a leading role in delivering more personally relevant communications. So this great schism that kind of happened between media and creative about 20 years ago had some benefits, and ultimately the two worked side by side well enough until this explosion of technology and platforms over the last 10 years. Now, depending on kind of which market you're in, you'll be familiar, I hope, with some of these, with these two statistics. And they might, as I say, they might vary, but they're relatively ring largely true. Now, virtually all the media we buy will be addressable in the near future. And we know to date less than 2% of investments that brands are making are currently being addressed through more kind of relevant and personalized messaging. So that's our ability to actually optimize the creative in line with the media. Now, we've kind of seen research demonstrating the impact of creative on delivering business outcomes. And we know that creative accounts for nearly 50% of the contribution of those outcomes. So what we see is, in order to really take that next step and deliver on the opportunity, we need to be thinking about media and message planning in sync and as an integrated capability. We're kind of hitting this plateau of media optimization at the moment, and we've been able to optimize the hell out of media, through new planning and buying technologies, new media channels that are available now, new platforms. We've optimized budgets, timings, placements, frequency, and that list kind of goes on. And we know that growth contribution of media has increased. So between 2006 to 2016, our ability, or media's ability, to contribute to growth outcomes grew by 140%. But the incremental gains that we can now make are going to be relatively small. But when we talk about kind of that next stage of addressability, currently today, we often see it being led by a conversation around how we can use technology more to further optimize our media, or how we can apply new data signals. And this conversation around technology and data is really where the conversation around addressability gets lost, and it does it a disservice. So what we see is this kind of next stage of message and media planning is applicable to all the media we buy. As I mentioned, we've been very, very good at collecting lots and lots of data on our audiences and understanding our audiences better than anyone else. And this will be applicable to all media channels. And I think, again, we do see an opportunity across all markets to elevate the conversation away from one of retargeting that's just consigned to the remit of display or digital display, to one that's applicable to many. And it's not just media channels that this applies to, or the growth, or a plethora of media channels. We're also seeing it across categories, or growth opportunities across categories. But most importantly, that last point, we're seeing growth opportunities across the consumer journey and across the funnel. Again, DCO, as it's been traditionally known, has been confined to the realms of that kind of bottom funnel, very performance-driven type approach, really because of the way in which we viewed the opportunity. With a different lens, we do know that, and we've seen examples of this consistently, that we can actually shift brand metrics as well. And I've just taken a sample here of studies and examples of clients from across Group M globally, where we've seen these different metrics applied, or these different opportunities applied across the funnel. So whether it's through brand growth, brand awareness, or brand affinity, to then through to kind of performance-driven metrics such as kind of sales or click through to site. We also see, through a more informed planning approach, Rory will touch on in a second, a more evolved production model that comes to play as well. And that production model that then relies precisely on who we're trying to speak to and where we're trying to speak to them, can actually help reduce production costs as well, because we know exactly what assets we need to create and how many of them we need to produce. So the final point for me, I guess, is when it comes to the opportunity, the key for us is we need to myth bust this premise of DCO and talk about something which is much bigger and has much larger capability to grow brands in a more relevant manner. And really, the way to unlock all this opportunity is through an integrated audience planning approach across creative and media. And that needs to be the start of our conversation when it comes to dynamic creative and when it comes to the addressable opportunity. It's certainly not one that should be led by technology, but one that is led by a really clear approach to audience planning.
And this is where I guess the conflicts or the paradox lies with addressable media and personalization and this modern approach to it. And that traditionally, this usually means a reduction in the size of the audience and the size of your campaign. Now, we know, and largely everyone is in agreement with the idea that the larger the reach, the more people you speak to, the greater the sales effect associated with it. The goal here is that we need to speak to as many people as possible within our category. And just an example here, Les Binet and Peter Field, some of the godfathers of modern marketing science, demonstrated that the impact in terms of very large business effects associated with a media channel is directly proportionate to its daily reach. Byron Sharp, his first law of growth is continuously reach all buyers of the category. Once again, reach rules. And then finally, the acerbic Mark Ritson. He also makes very similar points. The only way to achieve the sustainable short and long-term growth is to balance that targeted activation, but also that brand building aimed at the whole market. We have to achieve both of these. And so any development and any step forwards in terms of addressability, personalization, is about speaking to more people, or speaking to more people more relevantly, not less. And so this is how we really think about this. We can really break this down and really into 4 words. The first is to reach everyone. This is your effect driver. This is the main driver of the performance of your campaign in terms of driving sales through to the bottom line of the business. However, reaching everyone, but more relevantly. Now, this is what we're talking about really today. That is the focus and where this industry is moving more towards. This is the multiplier effect. This is what drives an additional incremental value, sometimes small, sometimes substantial, associated with those reach or broad-based category targeting campaigns. And so this is the key. And ultimately what we mean by this is that we need to shift away from this idea of exclusionary targeting through to inclusionary targeting. The old days of targeting, personalization, BCO, say retargeting, this idea that we will select a small audience based off of maybe arbitrary definitions of why we think they're different to our business. We need to move away from this because this essentially diminishes the scale and the opportunity of growth associated with our marketing and media campaigns. We need to move towards this idea of inclusionary targeting. This is targeting as many people as possible within the category, but understanding the differences, understanding the audience differences, the context differences, even the community differences. Because by creating more relevant messaging and delivering it on an addressable basis, something that is only really available now, makes this now possible. And so creative relevance, something that is now increasingly available, as I mentioned before, with the advent of things like machine learning and being able to rapidly develop large numbers of creative at a very cost-effective level, means that we can now start to think about these things at scale. And as I said, these work across 3 dimensions. The first is the audience, and most likely the most important here. This is about understanding who your customers are, how they differ from each other, how they buy your products and how those differ from other parts of your audience, and how your products and your brand fits into their daily lives. The second is content. This is probably the traditional contextual type way of thinking. However, we now are able to align the content from the creative now both into the content with which it's being received. But it's not just about alignments. Sometimes it's about disalignments. We know from the work of Karen Nelson-Field that when you break what is expected with what someone is exploring or engaging with, we can actually drive greater levels of active attention. So sometimes using the creative approach that actually breaks that context rather than just aligning with it can drive a beneficial outcome. And then finally, community relevance. This is more, I guess, of the future-facing side of things. This could be thought of as targeting, say, within the context of something like Reddit, or something that is traditionally very difficult for advertisers to align with, or within TikTok. This is targeting based off of these now essentially siloed communities on these very large platforms. These communities expect and communicate in very different manners with each other, with very different types of language and very different value structures. So this new approach allows us to integrate into these types of environments in ways which align with relevancy with not just the audience, but with the community and how they communicate. And so using an example here of work that we've done for Uber recently, the starting point is to understand the different life stages as an example of your audience. These tend to be, at least in the context of this client, very heterogeneous. These different audiences tend to buy and behave in different ways. They also have different audience sizes. And I think this highlights the importance of that issue of focusing on maximizing your reach, not decreasing it. By targeting only one of these, we decrease the campaign size by approximately 80%. So we need to speak to all of them. But it's not just speaking to them en masse. Now that we are able to rapidly develop large amounts of creative and speak to these people on an addressable basis, we should understand the occasions, or more specifically, or the more modern context, the entry points associated with how these audiences engage with this brand. In this example, a very important dimensional difference is the change between shared occasions and entry points through to solo. But not only that, there's then the context, the environment, the community-based dimension associated with all of these. All of these are valuable inputs that allow us, once we're delivering a campaign at scale, to ensure we are adapting and optimizing that creative and message to become more relevant. So we're speaking to these people in a manner which is most specific and most relevant and most effective for them. And then finally, the importance of not getting lost in the weeds with measurements. Marketing is much like physics. We struggle with reconciling the measurements of the very small, the campaign level, with the very large, the business level effects. Now, this advent of addressability and personalization runs the risk of us moving further and further away from all the big steps towards large business effects and large business understanding measurement that the industry has made. And so this is the importance here. The importance of having an actual measurement strategy. Because when we are running these types of campaigns, we need to be focused on two things: understanding the actual increase in the effectiveness and potentially the efficiency of our campaigns as a result of this personalization and addressability, but also keeping an eye on the business level profit and revenue contribution. Because by focusing on both of these and understanding that, look, sometimes a large campaign increase in performance does not relate to a large business increase in performance is important. But by understanding these, it allows us to close that gap, that problem that is now currently exists, where marketing carries out X campaign, but we don't see the same sales results appear on the bottom line for that business.
So I guess just to kind of summarize here with three key takeaways, that in terms of kind of how we're thinking about this at the moment and where we see the greatest opportunity for growth. One is have a think about where we can align better or where we can evolve our media and message planning as more of an integrated approach. And this is really kind of what represents that next stage to deliver greatest disproportionate advantage for many brands. We've seen that statistic there around 2% globally currently that we see of addressable media that is currently being addressed properly through relevant content. That there is a huge opportunity to take advantage for any brand or marketer or agency who feels that they can integrate their planning in this way.
The second takeaway that we want to ensure you guys take is this idea that you need to grow relevance but don't reduce the scale. As we said at the beginning, the size of your campaign, the number of people you speak to directly corresponds to the sales effect, at least at a total business level. But relevance is the multiplier to that. So when thinking about addressability and personalization at this level, ensure that you are not reducing the size of that campaign, just growing the relevance and creating better communication programs for your individual consumers. And then the final point here being the importance of having a measurement strategy. Understanding what is important to you, your business, and your campaign, but also understanding which of those metrics relate back and drive through to actual business level effects, whether that be profit contribution or revenue contribution. But ultimately, this need to have an actual strategy around this and to balance these two will drive success and remove that risk of getting stuck in the weeds once again with campaign level specifics that don't result in necessarily the most beneficial outcome. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys. So I've got a couple of questions. If anyone else has questions, you can put them in the comments box. I'm going to kick it off with a few questions that are probably more just going to build on some of the things that you spoke about, because I think, as I said at the start, we've been talking about addressability, or at least personalization, and the ability to do that in some way for 5 or 10 years. It seems really easy now. Like the way that you've explained it seems quite simple. There's 3 key takeaways. What do you think the biggest thing is that's stopping people being able to go out and do it now, to really make that leap and go, okay, we're going to move from a piece of creative down to the line where we're saying we're actually going to go down an addressable path now?
I'll kick off the start on that one. A lot of it, in terms of the marketers and clients that we speak to daily, a lot of it rests in kind of this the misconception around an ability to really scale this approach properly and effectively that can then apply to many brands within a particular portfolio or more widely across the business. The the challenge around obviously kind of data ownership is really, really important one. So any client or brand who readily has available to them a large kind of first-party data pool and has been investing into that over many years, I think is already in a really good place to activate on this. I think the other side of this is once you be able to build out your audiences effectively and manage that process, it then gets into what we do with that, and that gets into a conversation about production, which again carries its own, again, probably misconceptions around what's actually required, the costs, the scale, and the resource applied to that. As Rory mentioned, our ability to actually scale production now is relatively straightforward and easy, and it's something obviously we're investing in quite heavily as an agency. But they are often the kind of two key challenges. But you flip those challenges in a conversation quite easily by discussing what the challenges to growth are in terms of that next stage of evolution for a brand or a business. And once you start tackling those issues head on, and you're able to answer them in a really simple manner, we see adoption quite easily and readily.
And so off the back of that, what do you think some of the, I suppose that's the way forward. What do you think some of the bigger mistakes have been made by clients in the past? Because people have tried addressability or personalization in the past. What do you think the mistakes are? Do you think it's more around measurement and how they've measured the impact? And Rory touched on kind of a more balanced measurement scorecard in what we do. Do you think it's around the measurement? Do you think it's around the scale question around audiences and getting too optimized with the audiences that we're going after and not addressing scale? Or do you think it's a combination of both of those?
So I would argue it's probably a mixture of all of those things. Oh, sorry. I'd argue it's probably a mixture of all of those things. I've probably worked with at least a dozen clients over the years who have struggled or hit hurdles where they failed to demonstrate ROI against these types of approaches to deploying their media. I think that comes down to a few different areas. The first I actually think is operational. This represents quite a substantial operational shift, not just at the marketer's organizational level, but also within the media agency level. And that's a big challenge to solve. We like to think of ourselves as an innovative industry, but we have very strong and very built-in structured processes to things. And this represents a breaking of that. So I think that's been a traditional challenge in the past. The other major one, other than those issues around measurement, is actually probably scale of the opportunity. The implementation of a lot of the data type setups that you need, everything from DMPs to CDPs, can be fundamentally expensive on an upfront cost basis. Up to this point, you could really only execute in a number of areas. Display media being the DMP stronghold, through to on the CDP side, maybe your own channels. Now, I know that's an oversimplification, but that isn't usually enough to drive that level of effectiveness that you need to drive actual meaningful incremental growth. So now with the advent of digital out of home, the ability to access into things like even connected TVs allows this kind of capability to now be pulled out into wider campaigns. As I mentioned at the start of my section, the importance of speaking to more people is where that effect comes from. So now that we can apply this approach to more people, we should start to see great levels of success across clients.
Just to add, just around measurement, I think some of it, and what we talk about quite consistently here, is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And the challenge with measurement, especially where it evolved into a digital realm first and foremost in display, is that you had all these new metrics available to you, and therefore that's how campaigns should be measured, when actually it's not really the case. YouTube is a classic example in terms of how we view the YouTube opportunity or advertising on YouTube, and we get stuck very quickly on things like CTRs and CPMs, and not necessarily the ability for the content to kind of land effectively and how well that was received.
I think it's a good point around measurement, and hopefully that's something that people can take away today, because even though it is a much more simple process now, there is still complexity around it. You showed an example for Uber. There could be up to 20 different creative pieces based on life stage multiplied by occasions. There's different, Tom, you spoke at the start around the funnel and how DCO used to be very much the bottom end of the funnel. We're now saying that addressable creative can solve needs in mid-funnel or even upper funnel tactics. So I think that could get overly complex for people in trying to wrap their heads around how they measure multiple pieces of creative in multiple parts of the consumer journey. So having a more holistic, balanced kind of scorecard around how you measure the outcome of those things, I think is a really smart thing. I'm going to pick up on one more thing around something that Rory mentioned around operationalizing these kinds of things, and the way that we need to probably work differently from an agency perspective or from a client perspective. So maybe you guys can answer, thinking about how this, and you guys have really good experience in running these types of campaigns. Who are the types of people that you actually need to do it? What kinds of talent do you need to bring together from different parts of the organization now to actually effectively run an addressable media campaign? Because I can imagine that it's not just one person that is involved in this type of work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much a collaborative kind of planning approach to media, probably more so than any other we've done before. I think you certainly need a lot of varied stakeholders, from the likes of creative agency involvement, if there is a creative agency partner already, obviously client side, but you need across certainly how we operate in Australia, where we have Group M support and input from an activation measurement standpoint. We have our client and planning teams involved. We also then have obviously production capabilities that we need to execute on as well. And I think the streamlining those kind of processes and processes, people and technologies is a really, really important kind of first step in this, to make sure that you've got those, all those different kind of talents involved throughout that from day one, so everyone's working towards the same goal. That's often where it's fallen down in the past, where there hasn't been that alignment or that kind of cross set kind of capability.
Just to add to that, I think fundamentally where I've seen this work very well is when both sides of the agency client relationship are able to break the two biggest dimensional differences that we have as an industry. The first being the funnel difference or separation. You have marketers who are focused on the bottom of the funnel. They spend a lot of time focused on things like value messaging and price, the performance marketing side of things. Then you have on the other end of that scale, the brand managers. Traditionally, you could work siloed between these. It may not be advisable, but an organization can work well and grow under that structure. This type of approach means that you now need to cross those divides. You need strong understanding at a brand level to be applied to what was traditionally more performance-orientated approaches. The other side is also the divide at a channel level. And by channel, I mean the offline retail side of the business versus the digital side of the business. Digital has always tended to be siloed. I know a lot of organizations are breaking this down, expecting omni-channel marketers, but the ability to break down that barrier and understand what works at a broad scale as well as what also works at a smaller digital addressable level is also key. And this is fundamental, I personally believe, at a marketer level, but also at an agency level. We've both seemed to have built structures that work in this way, and that seems to be the biggest opportunity in terms of successfully operationalizing this type of approach.
Well, I think we'll leave it on that, because I think that's a really good point to end on it, and it's a recurring theme that we've had on Loop Live lately around operational changes that need to be made as we move into this type of work, e-commerce type of work, which is multifaceted, making sure that measurement and analytics is kind of front and center as well in the type of work that we do as well, but being able to do it at pace as well, because I think, organizational structures that slow down the speed of what we're doing kind of goes against the addressability of creative and the addressability of media. So making sure that those structures are in place so that we can get going, and make sure that, as Rory said, that there is business results off the back of everything that we're doing. So we're out of time. Thanks, guys. I think that's been really good today. Made it really simple in terms of the way that we think about addressable creative, and think about how we can increase that 2% to maybe 10% within the next year or so. So thanks for spending time today. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode, and thanks for everyone else for joining the Loop Live APAC.